Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn, and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. Today's story takes place in Troy, Missouri. Through over a decade of marriage, Russ and Betsey had experienced the ups and downs of their relationship. Though the couple didn't have any children together, they were raising Betsey's two daughters from a previous relationship. Betsey had had breast cancer in the past, but in 2011, the cancer came back, and this time it was now in her liver, which was really not good. Betsey had been told by doctors that she only had roughly about 3 to 5 years left to live. And Betsey decided she was going to do the most that she could with the time she had left. The couple went on a cruise in November 2011, and Betsey would call this her celebration of life cruise. They had gone on the cruise, they had an absolutely amazing time, and Betsey got to fulfill one of her lifelong dreams of swimming with dolphins. On December 27th, 2011, Betsey had a chemo appointment earlier in the day. Betsey had gone to her mother's house earlier before the appointment. Betsey went to her chemo appointment with a friend of hers, and while she was at her chemo appointment, unexpectedly, another friend of hers named Pam Hupp showed up. Apparently, we're rhyming. Betsey was not expecting Pam, and she was a little bit confused why she was there because Pam was a friend of Betsey's who had taken her to a lot of her chemo appointments. But that day, Betsey had specifically told Pam that she was going to this chemo appointment with another friend and they really wanted to have one-on-one time. But Pam was the kind of person who inserted herself in places that she probably should have stayed out of. After the chemo appointment, Betsey had gone back to her mother's house, and the plan was for her husband, Russ, to come and pick her up at her mother's and drive her home. Russ received a text from Betsey saying that Pam had just showed up and was insisting on driving her home, so she didn't need him to come and pick her up. That night, Russ had plans to hang out with a bunch of his friends. He had a group of friends and they would meet every Tuesday evening and they would play a role-playing type of game, hang out for a few hours, have a bit of a boys' night, and then that's what they would do every week. Russ, then knowing that Betsey had a drive home, he went to a couple of gas stations before he had gone to his friend's house. He then went to his friend's house. There were 4 other friends there, but I guess one of the friends who would normally come and play this game with them didn't show up. So the men decided that they were gonna smoke a little pot and watch some movies that evening instead of playing their game. At 9 o'clock, Russ and a couple of the other men who he had been watching movies with, they all decided it was time to head home. So Russ left his friend's house, which was about a 30-minute drive to his home in Troy. So along the way, he stopped at Arby's, he got a couple of sandwiches, he ate them, and then he returned home at 9:40 p.m. Russ arrived home, and he arrived home to an absolutely horrific scene. Betsey was lying dead in the den in a pool of her own blood. He was obviously shocked seeing her in this condition. He could see a knife was protruding from her neck, and he also noticed that both of her wrists had been slashed. So he called 911, and when he was on the call with 911, he was assuming at this point that Betsey had taken her own life. And Betsey had mentioned in the past taking her own life because she was going through chemo And anyone who has either gone through chemo themselves or been with a loved one as they go through it, it's an absolutely horrific experience. And sometimes she just felt like maybe it would just be easier to just end her life. But she had not taken her own life. She actually had 55 separate stab wounds on her body. But Russ, when calling 911, he could not see all of these injuries. When the paramedics arrived, they knew immediately that she had been killed. Someone had killed Betsey. And they noticed that she had started to go into rigor mortis and there was dried blood around her body. So the paramedics, when they arrived, they knew that she had not just died. They estimated that she had been dead for at least an hour. When police arrived, they were very suspicious of Russ. They thought at certain points he was overly emotional, and then they would ask him things that weren't directly related to Betsey's death, and he would calm down and be able to answer their questions a lot less emotionally. And to the police, this was extremely suspicious. And I feel like I say this in every video, but everyone reacts differently. If you walk in your home and your spouse is dead on the floor, everyone is going to react differently. Some people are going to go into shock and have very little reaction, all the way to the extreme of people being absolutely hysterical, and also anything in between. But police, right away, they were honing in on Russ. So let's go back a few days to December 22nd, 2011. So this is 5 days before Betsey's murder. Unbeknownst to her family, Betsey had actually changed the beneficiary of her life insurance policy to her friend Pam Hupp. Pam and Betsey had worked together about 10 years ago together at State Farm Insurance. But then they had lost contact after they stopped working together. And Pam had very recently come back into Betsey's life. When Pam found out that Betsey had cancer, she contacted Betsey and started to come around again, and the two of them became very close friends. And if you're like me, you're probably sitting there wondering, why on earth would Betsey change her life insurance when it was originally supposed to go to Russ, her husband, and her two daughters, to her friend Pam? Apparently, Betsey was afraid that Russ and her daughters would just piss away the money and it would be gone right away. So she had talked to Pam. Now, this conversation, once we get further in the story, it's probably the way the conversation actually went, was Pam probably convinced Betsey to do this, saying that she would put the money in the trust and she would allot it to the daughters as they needed it, and the money would be handled very responsibly. So that is why the life insurance was changed. So even though Pam was now the one who was going to get the money, the intention was never for Pam to actually spend any of the money. It was for her to allot it to Betsey's daughters. Like the money, even though it was going to legally go to Pam, it was for Pam to kind of allot and maybe give the daughters money slowly so that it didn't get wasted. Now, the police at this point, they are razor focused on Russ, the husband, because normally in true crime, it usually is the husband. or the wife. Those, most commonly, it's your spouse. They're the ones that are going to kill you. The thing about Pam was she was the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. She was also the last person to see Betsey alive. And her story about what occurred the last time she saw Betsey changed many, many times throughout her conversations with police. So originally, Pam said that she had driven Betsey home at 7 p.m. and she had said that she had stayed in the car and Betsey went in the house. As soon as she saw Betsey go inside, she then drove away. Then the story changed. She had actually gone into the house and turned the light on, and then she had left and driven away. Then the story changed. She had actually gone in the house and Betsey had got a jewelry cabinet for Christmas from her husband that she wanted to show Pam. So then Pam had actually gone all the way into the house, into the bedroom to see this jewelry cabinet. She then said that she had kind of tucked Pam in on the couch and then she had left. So police completely focused on Russ. And the day after Betsey's murder, Russ was arrested and charged with her murder. During a search of the house, police had found a pair of slippers that were in the back of Russ's closet that had some blood on them. The slippers that had blood on them, they didn't have blood on the bottoms of the slippers. So it wasn't as though someone had been wearing the slippers and walked through blood. There was just a spot of blood on these slippers. Police interrogated Russ for a very, very long time. And then they had him take a lie detector test. But it wasn't a real lie detector test. The lie detector, it was like a fake lie detector test, which is legal for police to do, but they have to inform the person that they are taking a fake lie detector test, which they certainly did not. The other thing is when Russ took this supposed lie detector test, he had been awake for 36 hours and he had also been smoking pot beforehand. So any police officer with any knowledge of lie detector tests would never perform a lie detector test on someone who had gone that long without sleep or could be under the influence of any type of drug. Police also interviewed Pam, and Pam is a very, very strange woman. In her interviews with police, she is almost like she's joking around. At one point, she's kind of flirting with the officer, and she doesn't seem upset or concerned about anything. And if supposedly this very, very close friend of hers has just been murdered, you think that she would be acting more serious in the interrogation. Like she seemed to take it just like you were having a casual conversation with friends over coffee, not talking about the murder of a person. One thing Pam told police in the police interview was that Russ was a violent man, that he had a drinking problem, that he had threatened to kill Betsey in the past. But the only problem was nobody else ever had heard any of this information. The only person this information ever came from was Pam. Pam told police that they should search Betsey's laptop. She said that Betsey had sent her an email that she had not received, basically, and in this email, it was Betsey talking about all of these bad things about Russ. But it wasn't an email, it was a document. And the document had been written on Word 97 software. And that software had never been installed on the computer. And it was the only document on the computer with an unknown author. So things are looking really suspicious. But not to police. Police are so focused on Russ, they don't seem to be looking anywhere else or looking at any evidence that would suggest anyone other than Russ committed this murder. And this is the focus of the police for the whole story, basically. And it gets even worse with the police, as it normally does. But as of right now, they're 100% focused on Russ, and they just have no interest in looking at anyone else. Another thing that the police found suspicious was that they said that Russ's alibi was too good. Yes, the alibi he had was too good. Now, the police seemed to be really into lie detector tests because they had given one to Russ. That was a fake lie detector test. But the night of the murder, when the murder had occurred, Russ was at a home 20 to 30 minutes away. So depending on how fast you drive, possibly you could have arrived within 20 minutes. But he made a stop at Arby's, so that would have been impossible. And there was proof that he had stopped at Arby's. But he was with these 4 men, and all 4 of these men said to police, he was with us the entire time. And all 4 of those men offered to take lie detector tests because they knew Russ had not done this because Russ had been with them. But police, no, that would go against their theory, so they weren't interested in that. And these were 4 regular men who had jobs and families. They weren't people who had criminal records or had any reason to lie to police. Because if you're going to lie to police and create an alibi for someone who has committed a murder, you're putting yourself at a huge risk. Because if you get caught lying about an alibi for someone who has murdered someone, you go to prison for a very long time. So the fact that he had these 4 men who didn't have a criminal record, weren't people who had committed crimes. I mean, the worst thing these men done was to smoke a little pot once in a while to have a good time. And police had no interest in that because their claim was the alibi is too good. It's too good. So I don't know. I mean, I get so over it with the police on a lot of these situations. Normally in cases on this channel, when I've talked about issues with the police, it's usually due to incompetence. But later in this story, it doesn't appear that this was police incompetence. It seems like the police were doing things that were illegal to try to make sure that Russ was convicted. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. January 3rd, 2012 was the day of Betsey's funeral. One thing that was very interesting is that Pam, who was the person who got the $150,000 life insurance, refused to pay for the funeral. Now, I don't know how that doesn't send off alarm bells to police. Your friend has put her life insurance in your name so that you can allocate it for her daughters. The money was never intended to be Pam's money. and she flat out refused to pay for the funeral. The next day, Russ was arrested and charged with Betsey's murder. Russ was unable to make the $250,000 bail, so he stayed in the jail until November 18th, 2013, when his trial began. And Russ's defense attorney started noticing some very strange behavior by the police. One of the first things was the police claimed that there were no crime scene photos. They said that they had taken pictures with a camera, the camera had malfunctioned, but the pictures had all been ruined, there were none. Well, when the defense attorney dug a little deeper, he found over 100 different photos of the crime scene. So the defense attorney used Russ's alibi. He had these 4 friends who had been with him. After he had left the friend's house at 9 o'clock, he had gone to Arby's, and there was proof of him being at Arby's. But the prosecutors claimed that these 4 men had all conspired with Russ to cover his tracks. And they also claimed that they had somehow tried to appear as though they were Russ at Arby's to create this alibi. The judge also refused to allow the defense to bring up the life insurance, bring up Pam as an alternate suspect. The trial judge really limited anything that the defense could bring up. The other thing about Pam was, remember earlier I had told you Pam had all these different stories for whether she went in to Betsey's house when she dropped her off or whether she didn't. But one thing that didn't change was she said she had left her house around 7:10. The thing is, her cell phone stayed in the area for another half an hour. So the defense attorney has all this evidence proving that it's a lot more likely that Pam committed this crime, not Russ, but he's not allowed to bring up any of this at the trial. And the defense attorney finds this really strange because he knows that the judge is making these rulings against him. He also knows that the judge is making these rulings against him when he knows the judge shouldn't be limiting him this much. He was a good lawyer. He had done a lot of trials, and he was very suspicious, first of the police, then the prosecutor, and also the judge. And it turns out this defense attorney was onto something. But the defense attorney, his hands were tied. He is in trial, and the judge makes the final decision on what is allowed to be presented and what is not. So unfortunately, on November 21st, 2013, Russ was convicted of the murder of Betsey. Russ was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years without the possibility of parole. In cases, it's often that the defense attorney, even if their client is convicted, is still going to hold the belief and the stance with the public that his client is innocent. The thing was, it wasn't just the defense attorney who was suspicious of the entire situation. In January 2014, KTV1 partnered with a St. Louis newspaper called the Post-Dispatch to review the case. So the first thing they looked at was the life insurance had been changed 5 days before Betsey was murdered. Pam was supposed to be putting this money in a trust for Betsey's daughters. Now, the police had told Betsey that she should put the money in a trust. So during the trial, Betsey puts the money in the trust for the daughters. But as soon as the trial is over, she takes the money out of the trust. Betsey's daughters had never seen a cent of this money. And when they start reviewing Pam's questioning by police, Pam says the wildest, craziest things that any person would find suspicious. When she was talking about the life insurance going to her, she said to the police, well, if I wanted to kill someone for money, I'd kill my mom. She has a lot more life insurance. And then she said, well, if I wanted money from life insurance, my husband, he would be dead because he's got a life insurance policy. So the beneficiary of both of these policies is Pam. Then when the police asked Pam, well, do you have a life insurance policy? She's like, no, I don't believe in life insurance. The life insurance queen doesn't believe in life insurance on herself, because the thing is if she has life insurance on herself, that's not going to benefit her. So finally, the defense attorney for Russ, he figures out what was going on. He discovers that the prosecutor and the head of investigations, they were going to Bangtown together. The two of them were having sex and had a very intimate relationship. Then the judge gets in a whole lot of trouble because the judge's rulings in this case were absolutely ridiculous. So based on the investigator, the prosecutor, and the judge, finally, Russ is granted a new trial. And at this trial, the defense attorney is actually allowed to present the defense. So on November 7th, 2015, after spending almost 4 years in prison, Russ's conviction was overturned. He won a settlement of $2 million. So even though they know now Russ didn't commit the murder, they don't have any interest in doing anything to try to investigate Pam further. They claimed that Pam had an injury and she was too small to commit this murder. Now, Pam, she is a sketchy woman, and in this video, she kills more people. Like, we're going to keep going with Pam, just to let you know. Pam does a whole bunch of other shit. But basically, she had claimed that she was working, she had hit her head on a filing cabinet, she had memory problems, she had back problems, and she had all these problems. She had a million different problems. But then she was videotaped by a news reporter, and she was running away from the reporter. So you see this woman who apparently has such a disability that she can't work, but she sure as hell can run like a motherfucker. So now we're going to move on to Louis Gumpenberger. He was a resident of Union, Missouri. Now, he actually did have disabilities. He had mental and physical disabilities from a car crash that had happened in 2005. Shortly after noon on August 16th, 2016, Pam makes a 911 call, and this is probably the strangest 911 call I've ever heard. Pam calls 911 and she's literally like, help, help, help. And then you hear gunshots. Pam had shot Louis 5 times and he passed away. And she was claiming that she killed him because he had broken into her home. Louis was found with a note that basically gave instructions to kidnap Pam, take her to the bank, get Russ's money back, and kill her, and he'll be paid $10,000. The other thing that was found on him was 9 $100 bills. Now, the significance of these 9 bills is that there were 9 bills, and they all have a serial number on them. To keep it simple, I'm just going to do 1 to 9 as the serial number. So they've got 9 $1 bills, and say the serial number on the first one is 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 9. The next serial number was found on a $100 bill on Pam's dresser. So how did this man who supposedly broke into her house, was paid $900 to kill Pam, how does she have a $100 bill with the next serial number on it? And then witnesses started coming forward. Apparently what Pam was doing was she was going up to strangers saying that she was a producer for Dateline. And how dare this bitch try to damage the name of Dateline? God, the nerve. But anyways, so what Pam is doing is she is going up to random people on the street. Louis was not the first person she approached with this. She went up to another woman and she offered the woman $1,000 if she would come to her house and make a fake 911 call, all while claiming to be a producer for Dateline. So this is going to be like a 911 call that they're reenacting that's going to be on Dateline. So Pam, she's still going with the story that she killed this man in self-defense. What she's saying happened is he hopped into her car when she was in her driveway. He had a knife and he was threatening her with the knife. Then Pam karate chops Louis, runs in the house. Louis runs after her, and then she calls 911 and says, "Someone's broken into my home. Can you send help? Help? Help?" And then you hear bang, bang, bang. It was the most ridiculous fake 911 call. And the reason Pam did this was she was trying to implicate Russ, as though Russ was trying to murder her. And it's like, sweetie, you already got away with 1 murder. Well, maybe 2. We're going to go into that in a second. But you've already got away with Betsey's murder. You're now trying to murder someone else to implicate Russ, who's already been found not guilty. Like, it's just a lot of not making a hell of a lot of sense. So she gets arrested and charged with Louis's murder. And apparently she chose him because he did have mental and physical disabilities. So she specifically targeted him because of the disabilities that he had. In August 2019, Pam takes an Alford plea. And an Alford plea is basically you're guilty, but you don't want to admit it. It basically is saying that I am not admitting to guilt, but there is enough evidence to prove that I am actually guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, everything else in this is going to be alleged, but here we go. Let's talk about Pam's mom, Shirley. Shirley, Pam's mom, was living in a independent living apartment for seniors. She lived on the 3rd floor. So this incident takes place after Russ had been convicted of Betsey's murder, but before he had been sentenced. So on October 29th, Pam went and took her mom out to lunch. Pam had also taken her mother to an appointment at the hospital and spent some time with her in the evening. Now, Pam ends up going to the staff of this apartment living. And the way this complex living situation was, for Pam's mom, Shirley, is that it's for seniors to live independently in their own apartments, but they also have a dining area downstairs. So what Shirley would do is she lived in her own apartment, but there was also a lot of care provided. And for meals, she would just come down and have dinner in the dining room with the other people who lived in these buildings. But Pam, after she had supposedly left her mother's apartment, told staff her mother would not be down for dinner and most likely would not be down for breakfast the next day. And then she left. The next day, a housekeeper found Shirley dead beneath her balcony. When an autopsy was done, she had 8 times the amount of Ambien that someone would have in their system if they were taking the medication as prescribed. I'm going to give you one guess as to who is prescribed Ambien. If you guessed Pam, you get 5 crazy points. Shirley's death was initially ruled an accident in the assumption that she had fallen over the balcony by mistake and had passed away. But then they started investigating the balcony, and the way the balcony was broken was that it looked as though somebody had actually kicked through the railing, not that someone had fallen over a balcony and it had broken in the action of someone falling over it. It actually looked like someone had just kicked through it to damage the balcony. So that's a little suspicious. So her cause of death was changed to undetermined. Investigators also looking into Shirley's death looked at the video that Pam had done the interview with the police when she was being questioned about Betsey's death, and how she talked quite excitedly about how if she wanted to kill someone, all she had to do was kill her mother and she could make it look like an accident. Maybe if you have a plan to commit a murder, don't tell the police. But I don't know, Pam seems pretty comfortable telling the police absolutely anything. So there was never any charges ever brought against Pam for her mother's death. Pam, however, has been charged with Betsey's murder. There was supposed to be a preliminary hearing February 2022, but right before this hearing, Pam's attorney died of a heart attack. So as it stands right now, Pam is still in prison for killing Louis, but they still do plan to go through and have a trial for the murder of Betsey. But as it stands right now, there's kind of a standstill until she can have a defense attorney who can kind of catch up on all of the evidence that he would need to do to be able to defend her. If there is an update and that actually ends up going to trial and there is a result, I'll do an update on here. But Pammy girl, watch out, because there's a lot of evidence. And this time, the prosecutor, the investigator, and the judge hopefully won't be corrupt and you'll actually get charged with the murder you committed. Allegedly, please don't sue me. Alleged. So that's the end of today's story and the wild story of Pam Hupp, who just seems to like killing people for life insurance. If this woman put as much effort into, I don't know, a job as she did into planning, executing murders and life insurance collection, she probably would end up with more money. But yeah, life insurance seems to be her main income source. But she doesn't have any. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to all my returning subscribers who come back and watch each and every video. And thank you so much for all the comments you guys leave below the videos. But yeah, I really love hearing all of your opinions. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you'd like to see more from me, please subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel, stick around and watch another video. As always, if you have any suggestions, please let me know. It can either be a comment on any video or on Instagram. My Instagram is just @abnormallycarolyn. And I will see you guys next time.